Hey, welcome everyone to You Be the Judge. We're here from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I guess I have to put that because I get these emails saying, I forgot what time you're on. We're Eastern Standard Time. So for all you people out there in podcast land, you can always catch us on any of the social medias or ask us questions about any of our shows. I am Dr. Dyer, and I have two lovely co-hosts, Mel and Pierre, who ran for Circuit Court Judge in Montgomery County, and we have Judge Claudia Barbara. She often joins us later than sooner because she's a busy woman getting all this stuff done for the Caucus of African American Leaders and a whole bunch of other things. So I know we have two amazing guests that are coming on. We always like to have our guests. And ultimately, we like to do three things. We like to give you information and hope you understand it. So it's information, understanding, and then here's the key thing. I want people to go into an action base. Just because you hear something and you understand something, if you don't put it into action, then it's useless. And the issue we have with many of the African American communities, melanin communities, Black and brown communities, is that they don't put things into action. Before we kick it off, I do want to let people know that we're in the process. I'm with a group of founders that we're starting a charter school in Annapolis, and I would love your letters of support saying you support the new charter school. This is one of those ways. This is one of those ways that we're going to be closing the wealth gap, whereby educating our kids properly and with dynamic education, not the boring education that public schools have. So with that being said, Marilyn, you want to introduce our guest?
Oh, yes, it is such a pleasure that we have both of our guests here. I cannot wait to hear from them. I am going to start with Diane Cameron's bio first, not because of anything except, alphabetically she comes first, so we'll start her first. But the guests, once they've been introduced, can speak in whatever order that they want to. So let's start with Diane Cameron. Diane Cameron believes that we have a civil right and responsibility to repair that which is broken. She is energized to create a culture and economy where it's easy to be good to each other. Since the 1970s, she has been an advocate for and practitioner of clean water and local forest protection, and now for housing justice and land justice. Groups that Diane currently works with include Friends of 10 Mile Creek, Montgomery Countryside, Montgomery Countryside Alliance, Transit Alternatives to Mid-County Highway Extended, or TAME Coalition, and Educational Sustainability and Mobilization. The latter is headed by Ms. Initial Miller, who is also our other guest. A resident of Kensington, where she helps care for a 5-year-old granddaughter, she and her husband, Joseph Horgan, have 2 grown daughters who live with their families and who are renters in Montgomery County. Diane attended the University of Maryland, where she got a master's in environmental engineering, focused on keeping toxics out of our water bodies. In the mid-1980s, she enjoyed living in Greenbelt homes in a cooperatively owned townhouse. And from that experience, she believes that housing cooperatives centering low-income and middle-income people are part of what we need to do now to respond to the climate and housing emergency. Please welcome Ms. Diane Cameron to You Be the Judge, but not yet. We're going to welcome her together with Ms. Initial Miller, because we are now going to introduce Miss Miller, because she is our other guest. Okay. Miss Initial Miller is actually sitting next to Miss Cameron, and Miss Initial Miller's bio is as follows. Miss Initial Miller is a full-time direct service provider at United Community Supports of Maryland and the East County Network Builder. Ms. Miller is a devoted mother, wife, and an avid student. Ms. Miller currently splits her time connecting residents to resources in Montgomery County, where she is a rising philanthropist. In 2019, Ms. Miller founded Educational Sustainability Mobilization, Inc., a 501c3 organization that is a community trusted partner for over 18 years advocating on behalf of underrepresented communities. She is a former commissioner and public representative of the Interagency Commission Homelessness and founder of the People's Committee. Her other interests include reading and styling natural hair. Please welcome Miss Initial Miller and now Miss Diane Cameron to You Be the Judge. Miss Miller, Miss Cameron, you may begin. Okay, can you unmute yourself so that you could begin? Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. We are so happy to be here tonight, Aneshul and I, and thank you so much for inviting us to speak on You Be the Judge. We're happy to be here tonight. And we wanted to talk, Aneshul and I wanted to begin by talking a little bit about how we met.
Oh, Miss Cameron, Miss Cameron, can you hear me?
Over a year ago, as we were both working. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you were breaking up a little bit. I wonder if we could do it the other way, where you do the sound on the telephone instead, because we could see you fine, but the sound is kind of garbled. So maybe we could do it on the telephone.
Another way they could handle it would be to turn off their camera. It would save bandwidth. They may not have enough bandwidth to carry both the video and the audio right now.
Well, which is why I'm saying, since we want the video on the, we want the video on the video, they could do audio on the telephone.
And we do apologize for anyone who ever has a problem. We are being monitored by the FBI, I'm convinced. And that's
the CIA and the NSA. And don't forget the KGB and who else? Oh, and who does James Bond work for? M6?
Oh, MI6.
MI6, okay. So we're being monitored by all of them. So that's why we're having these issues.
So it doesn't happen anyplace else. So it happens here.
Yes, it does. Exactly. So, yeah, because I see that Miss Cameron is also on the telephone. So I think is it *6 to unmute yourself on the telephone? Yeah, that's what it is, right? Okay, we will. Okay, so I'm asking her to unmute. Okay, are we set?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Perfect, yes.
Great, and you can see Aneshul and me? Great. So we Aneshul and I met about a year and a half ago when we were both independently. We were both working to respond to the proposed Thrive Montgomery 2050 plan that was introduced to the county council several years ago. And long story short, it's a new comprehensive plan for Montgomery County, and Aneshul and I had very similar responses to it as citizens, as people who have worked on environmental issues, which was my background, and housing and environment is Aneshul's background. And we both, shall we say, had a lot of skepticism about Thrive Montgomery 2050. And so that was how we initially met. And then we met and that was over many Zoom meetings. And then we met in person last May May 20th, I think
May
it was.
20th, yes.
Yeah.
Maryland was actually a part of that event in East County. It was May 20th of 2022. We went to an event, and the reason why I remember that day, it's my brother's birthday as well on that day, and he was one of the guest speakers, and he would have been overcoming being displaced for over 8 years. And so his testimony that day in front of individuals who were actually going to be running for office, as well as Maryland as well. So we were there to support him, and I am thankful to be here as well, and thank you for the invite. And like Diane was saying, we both share similar beliefs as it relates to disparities, social determinants, as well as finding solutions to help residents overcome hardships. And those are a variety. So my organization, which is fairly new, I'm really old in relation to outreach, right? It's not something that I just began doing, but I will say that the organization, since 2019, we've been connecting to community through their lived experiences to prevent displacement. And we assist residents in a variety of areas. And so when we looked at Thrive at that time, we wanted to come together to provide housing solutions because we don't jive around with, watching the growing homeless populations here in Montgomery County, particularly our Black men at about 70 to 79%. And so we would like to improve that number, and we have a variety of solutions and just really valid points from the community as well of why we need more support from everyone. And I don't know if, anyone would like to, I would like to know who the audience is tonight, and it would be very helpful, right? And so, yeah.
Well, I could tell you, and people could identify themselves if they want to, but I could tell you from past experience, we are a bunch of concerned Montgomery County residents mainly, but we're also from other places, and we welcome people from everywhere to come and join us. We also have, since this is a podcast, we also are on YouTube. We are on Sirius Radio. I forgot what else. I always forget the last one that we're on. I apologize for that. But that is who we are. And yes, I remember your brother's story. His story was just so compelling. I really enjoyed hearing it, even though I did not enjoy hearing the hardship that he had to go through in terms of housing. So thank you for that. And for those who don't know, do you want to explain what Thrive Montgomery 2050 is?
Yes, before Diane explains Thrive 2050, I will say that my brother is now housed through to dedicated outreach advocates, and he's always been working. It's just that he wouldn't have made ever enough to fulfill the high rents here in Montgomery County. And so, but him and his significant other are housed. They're doing really well, and they are all training in different areas of public health sectors. Right now, we're holding a forum weekly on Fridays. Everyone is welcome to attend. We are entering the community health worker sector, and that is a new training through Montgomery College that really focused on public health and social determinants as it relates to the public health worker. And that training is now being provided through Montgomery County College. It'll actually start on May 30th. It is an associate's degree as well as a 15-week training certification through Montgomery College and other secondary educational programs throughout Maryland. My organization's focus is to be accredited as of this year so that we may also offer the training to residents who are interested in becoming a healthcare professional, because We know that due to COVID, we lost a lot of workers as well as community. And so we definitely wanted to contribute by bringing this training into our organization. And in regard to Thrive, which really, when we look at housing, health also plays a trivial part in how we're housed as well. And so I'll let Diane talk more about Thrive 2050.
Thank you, Aneshul. Yes, Thrive Montgomery 2050 is the official name of our newly revised county comprehensive plan. So I think everyone here on this in this event has heard of land use planning, and it's something that local governments do. Local governments take a map of your town or your city, in our case of our county, and on the map you draw where you want your farming to be. And we do have that place set out. It's 1/3 of our county's land area, and it's called the Agricultural Reserve. And then you map out where you want most of your residents to live, and where you want your city or city centers to be, your urban areas, and you map that out. And then you map out your transportation network. If you want transit systems or roads and parks, and if you want in industrial zones, you map that out, and that's comprehensive planning. And we look to our local governments, and we look to Montgomery County government to be holistic and to think of all these things, starting with housing, and think of all of these elements and put them together in a way that makes sense and that meets everyone's needs. And that's what we as residents and citizens look to our government to do. And so that was the challenge that our planning board initially under Casey Anderson I think it was roughly 4 or 5 years ago, started this effort. And it had a premise that right away I was one of about, 20 or 50 people who initially said, wait a minute, why do we need to revise our county? We already have a countywide land use plan that's been around for many years. And yes, let's look at it, but why does it need a complete overhaul? We questioned that. And so maybe that's enough of the background.
Yeah, and as for me, when it came to Thrive, my focus was more about the significance of engaging core residents for low-income housing accessibility. I felt that the county, with its new Thrive plan, did not focus on including us in that planning. And so we definitely felt that it was a need to get residents involved due to that high number of displacement of African-American residents, as well as fully 70,000 households, and more than 20% of households in Montgomery County earn less than $50,000 per year. And so,
you said 20% of households in Montgomery County earn less than $50,000 per year?
Yes.
Wow. Because this is a high cost area to live in. Yeah. Wow.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And yes. Okay, so let me go back to Diane a little bit, because she said that she had some concerns, and then after that, Initial, if you could respond to how what you did to include the households that you felt were being left out.
Okay.
Yes. Well, as I'm semi-retired as an environmental advocate, and so my career has been in the nonprofit environmental advocacy world, and so that was my first framework, or my first lens through which I looked at Thrive. And I was concerned from the get-go with for example, there was an anti-rural bias in Thrive that basically is saying, why do we need an ag reserve? Let's just put solar panels on the whole thing because it's just empty land.
If we could hold on for just 1 second right there. I heard that, and I heard there was a lot of excitement about it. Let's put solar panels. We have acres and acres of land where the solar panels could go. And also let's do, ag tourism? That was also something that was suggested.
Correct.
So you didn't like those things, and tell us why.
So not myself and not my colleagues, no one said that we're against solar, and no one has said that we are against encouraging people to be respectful tourists in farming country. But what we were saying was we've got to respect that the fact that we have an agricultural reserve whose purpose is to produce food and fiber and plant products and clean water and open space, biodiversity through the forests and clean air, clean water that it provides. We need to respect that and not skip over that and just declare that it's empty land that we should industrialize and with large industrial solar facilities. And actually farmers have already experienced displacement from the push for big solar. They've had farmers who rent the land that they, are tenants on the land that they farm, some farmers in Montgomery County have already been experienced that their leases were terminated, or entry-level farmers who want to buy farmland and start a new farm have been found that they can't afford the land because the land prices are already being driven up by solar speculators and other deep pocket speculators. And that's actually going on, as Aneshul talked about earlier, about the very troubling numbers of how many households are experiencing housing burdens in Montgomery County. And there's a big spike in homelessness. And I see it as the same basic problem in both cases, both in our urban and suburban areas where people are experiencing eviction and pressure on their family's budget because of the rent going up in our urban and suburban areas. And then in our rural areas, our farmers are experiencing very similar or the same phenomenon of either being evicted through their lease being terminated or increased price to lease the land, or prohibitive sale prices where entry-level farmers want to come here and produce food for our tables, and they can't because they can't afford the land. And I see it as the same problem across, whether it's in the countryside or here in Silver Spring. And the people, Casey Anderson, Hans Riemer, the rest of the county council last year, they all said that their intention was to help the housing problem. But as Aneshul and I kept looking at it, all we saw was that it's going to make the whole problem worse.
Okay, so initially it's your turn to talk about what you saw in terms of the people you were concerned with being left out and what you are doing to help them be included.
Well, so, we know that during that time, since we're on the subject of Thrive, we look at through a racial equity, social justice process. We were asking the council to seek out and work with low wealth community, as well as use different approaches when working with us, which would be me. Although I may work, I still would be considered low wealth, right? I wouldn't be considered very low income, but those are the residents that I work with, overcoming being very low income, right, to low income. So that's not a big stretch, but in relation to supportive programs like yours and Diane's and just community in a whole, we were really just looking at what was at stake for low-income residents to include them in the conversation. So what we did get is sort of a middle of engagement, more so going through need or utilizing need, and not so much as having low-income residents participate in the processes. And so I believe that Thrive process was uninclusive, in that it did not shape, it could not shape the outcomes correctly without utilizing those vulnerable residents whose housing as well as jobs, because displacement is not just about your house. Sometimes it's about your educational needs, your work, proximity of you being near your family. And so a lot of things play into displacement and
well, you are I would say a very well-known advocate for the people that you advocate for, the low wealth community. Did anybody contact you and say, this is what we were planning on doing, and what are the people you represent or the people you seek to help thinking about this? How is it going to affect them?
Oh, yes, of course. But just because I'm a representative, that does not mean that I speak. It's okay for me to represent. But what I'm not saying is that residents have an opportunity to sit at the table and really help bring in real solutions and not be used as a buffer or just using those statements of low income, poverty, knowing that Thrive would produce rents that are beyond even a middle class person's being able to afford rents. And so we didn't want to buffer, right? We wanted them to truly work and consider low-income residents as citizens.
Yes.
Are there any other questions at this time, or should we proceed to our next part of this evening, which we have a number of examples of housing solutions.
Oh yes, please. Before we start, does anybody have any questions before we start on that portion? Okay, hearing none, please proceed.
Great, thank you. So we have, Aneshul and I have listed 7 different types of housing solutions, and this is not exhaustive. There's many others, but we wanted to list some of them for you and just give a little bit of description, a little commentary from both of us. And the first one I wanted to describe is the, as already you mentioned in my bio, Marilyn, Greenbelt Homes Incorporated is an example of a cooperative housing development that was built it was initiated in 1935. So it's almost pretty soon going to be a 100-year-old example. It's been there almost 90 years now. And I lived there in Greenbelt, in one of the Greenbelt Homes Incorporated townhouses in the mid-1980s, and I liked it very much. It was a walkable community. They were fairly small townhouses, and each townhouse had its own little front yard and backyard. And the way it works financially is usually they're very affordable. I probably not deeply affordable, probably more what we would consider moderately priced. And the way it works legally and financially is that when you and your family buy into this, you are buying a share in the cooperative. and the cooperative owns the land and the housing unit, and then you are given your basically equity share of the townhouse you live in. And then when you want to move out, you're supposed to live there 3 years or more. If you move out after 3 years, you then you collect any additional like profit from any increase in the market rate that you sell at. You have that, you collect that. So it's a very different model than we're used to, as you know, in terms of people either renting or paying rent or outright buying a single family home. And I think it deserves to be looked at more and adapted. It's not perfect, but it has stood the test of time. It still is there. It still is there today.
Yeah, and that's a great idea. I grew up in New York, so I'm familiar with co-ops, but I have not seen any co-ops down here. And I mean, they might exist, and I'm not aware of them. So I don't have any questions about that. Does anybody have any questions about what a co-op is and why it's made that way? And I know some people who are on here would like to know what the choices are in terms of housing because they are interested and having us discuss this topic so that hopefully they might be able to figure out a way to own something someday or even live in a better neighborhood someday. Yeah. So, but my question with co-ops has always been, why is the property value, I shouldn't say property value. Why does it seem like it's easier for people to get into a co-op than it would be for them to get into a condo, for instance? Because to me, they're in the same vicinity, but the condo is, well, from what I've seen, the condo is more expensive than the co-op, but the values of both seems to be comparable and comparable neighborhoods. Do you know why it's an easier buy-in for a co-op than a condo? Is what I'm asking.
I don't know. I'm a student of housing, and I've learned so much from working with Aneshul. And I don't know the answer, but I could offer a theory to be tested by research. My theory is that the reason is that a housing co-op, at least where I lived in Greenbelt, is organized to be social housing. Yes. It's not organized to be market rate with the developer and everyone else making a profit. It's not in the market profit model. That's why.
Yeah, it's more so of a cooperative that a few or many will gather and create something that's comfortable for those individuals who are seeking to be a part of that collaborative, right? And so in that, I don't think if you were having high rents or at fixed income, you would choose high, right? You would you would create something comfortable. And so that's why it's significant in its model that it is affordable, that you hold shares in it, that it's in a walkable community, that it gives something back to you. And if you were to leave, you could offset it to family, right? And so that's what a collaboration is when we have those type of models.
And I think that's such a great idea as well, because it's so important, that equity or profit part that you talk about, because you could rent in a place for 100 years and have no stake in it whatsoever. But the idea that with every payment you're making to the co-op, you are gaining equity or profit in it as well. That then gives the person an opportunity to own something and take the profit to someplace else that they might want to move to. So that's excellent. So thank you for that idea. Do you want to move on to the second one?
Yes. Our second one is public housing, which is widely supported by the individuals and their families who live in public housing. I learned this roughly in 2015. I attended a performance, a spoken word performance by residents in DC public housing. And it was a group of about 10 women, and who all stood together on stage, and then each woman came forward and told her lived experience of living in a growing up in and living in public housing in DC. And I was surprised that all of their stories were positive, and they wanted to keep living there. Yes, they wanted more support and more certain things improved, but their message was, don't displace us, support us to keep living here, that we like our community.
Yes. Yes, that is true. I wouldn't, my parents, I did not grow up living in public housing, but I will say that once my mother became ill, as me transitioning onto my own, that I would have chose public housing as well. So public housing has a lot of different programs in a way, right? So you have the Section 8, which is in-house, and then you have your housing choice voucher, which allows you to be stationary where you're at or move around, right? Whereas Section 8 is in-house. You're living on sites under a PHA, public housing unit, and you're not going anywhere. You're there. And what it does is that your income is dependent upon you living there, meaning you most likely would not have income, right? And more so a voucher, you more so have some form of income, whether it's SSI or it is a, work, but you wouldn't be making more than, at 65,000, there's sort of a cap based on how many children you have, right? Or your medium income. But I would say a housing choice voucher or a public housing program are all great supportive programs for low income residents. But what it sometimes lacks is that environment that is structured around your immediate needs to overcome some of those barriers as it relates to education or your health and or sometimes mental well-being. And so I support public housing programs, but I also believe that digging a little deeper within how we look at low-income residents and assessing what their needs are, we could do a little bit better, because if not, programs can seemingly look enabling, meaning there's no reasonable trajectory of where you go. Whereas with military, as you see, they're provided certifications. They're provided an opportunity for education, and those reforms fit really well for them. And we utilize the same types of those type of funding mechanisms. And so I always felt that public housing needed to keep that in mind, that continuing education, because you can have a voucher as long as you don't die or sell drugs in the property. And so that's not, those are like, okay, I shouldn't die and or become a drug dealer. I mean, like, there has to be a middle in between that of me transitioning out of poverty through a program such as itself.
And do you see some upward mobility for people? Because the research has shown that it's really, really difficult for people to have upward mobility in this country.
Diane, would you like to talk about upward mobility? And then I'll come back in.
Sure. Right now, I feel in Montgomery County, I feel that there's very little, if any, upward mobility. I think our country, and even here in Montgomery County, used to have more pathways for people to move into a new career and into new housing, or live in a different neighborhood if they want to. And I feel that now those options have become so expensive that that I think that people are finding it difficult to have upward mobility. Is there any other aspect to?
I mean, when I look
yeah,
at
and that's not to say that people shouldn't strive. I just know a lot of people who are trying, and they try so hard, and they do everything that they could possibly think of, because they don't want to live in public housing. They don't want to be dependent on anyone. And yet it's so hard for them to get out of that situation because they don't have the network. They don't have the safety nets that other people have. And I just, and people have heard me say it before, I just get so upset when I hear, oh, billions of dollars are going to so-and-so. Recently, let's say the Silicon Valley bank situation, over a weekend, they were like, hey, we're giving billions of dollars to these people, and nobody batted an eye. But if you say you're giving a couple of $100 to somebody who is in need, all of a sudden they want to know your social security number. They want to know, your mother's maiden name. They want to know what you're going to be doing with this, that, and the other. And it's demeaning. The way that we treat people who don't have in this country. And I think this county is especially harsh based on the other places that I've lived in. It's just really, really demeaning the way people are treated, just because, what does Tracy Chapman say? Their sole misfortune was to have mountains of nothing at birth. So that's why I ask about upward mobility. And I don't know if you want to address that or if you want to move to number 3.
I will say that when I first came to Montgomery County, which was only 30, I didn't live with 45 minutes, meaning I grew up in Southeast Washington, D.C. And I was treated like a refugee. And I'm like, I just live like 2 hours away. But for the first 6 years of moving here in 1998, I was treated. I had to really figure out, and that was one of the reasons. Once I figured it out, I then started doing consulting work by door knocking. I'm probably one of the first door knockers in the East County area. And through that door knocking, I really was trying to prepare residents who were displaced from Southeast Washington, D.C., New Orleans, and other places, because Katrina had come during that time. And we were just seeing such devastating outcomes for residents who lived right down the highway, just coming into this county and literally not given any resources, right? Until I decided that, okay, let me check voter. I went back to 1967, utilizing Martin Luther King's Fair Housing Act, and I found out that voter registration was something that the county sort of held dear to them, like a stepchild. But it also, if you did not utilize it, then you didn't exist in this county. And so that meaning I would have to become a Democrat or a Republican, because the other two parties don't exist in all reality. And so that is not what I wanted to have to do, because I did not understand that process either, meaning it was not something that was significant during my education. They did not tell us a lot about that. Of course, I would have went on to learn about it on my own. But when I think about upward mobility, I kind of think about that the only way we would have true upward mobility if more so we came together in a collaborative style, looking at food, education, looking at health and wellness together as a group, and still understanding that we still have to use policy, we still have to use reform, we still have to engage with decision makers, but not allowing them to sort of like shelf us the way it's being done now. And so we never see resolve, because they have their own agendas that they feel are necessity. And so as a community, I feel like we definitely need to come together and support better outcomes that we identify in our different communities.
Wonderful. Thank you. Should we move on to number 3?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. The third example we wanted to give is Section 8, which are the housing vouchers, and you've mentioned it a little bit before, National.
Yes, we just kind of touched on Section 8. And when I look at Section 8, I also think about Section 3. So Section 8 is, again, for very, very low income residents. But let's not focus on Section 8. Let's move your focus into the concern. So Section 3 is the concern. That concern is based upon by any means necessary, as we know, Malcolm X would have said. But hey, it's identified in Section 3, which means that the business concern. So if we look across everywhere, you will see Section 3 in place. Most companies get to utilize Section 3. That doesn't mean you and me know about it, right? So what I'll say is, when you get an opportunity, look up Section 3. And maybe you or your business is supportive of Section 3 because you believe in the business concern and that you have a business who would like to help residents who are low income or very low income either succeed in upward mobility with either work, training, or housing. And so you can do that on your own by just typing in Section 3 and then typing in the word HUD and seeing how a lot of different businesses across the board utilize Section 3 as well as the community block grants. And that'll give you a better idea and trajectory of who are you trying to serve in your community, and does Section 3 apply to your business? Because in a Section 3 model, you need to make $500 million. And most, I don't know, I don't make $500 million. And so that's a pretty decent number for trying to assist low-income residents, middle class, because they already have a cost burden right now. And so they would probably fit in those categories as well. So thank you.
Interesting. I've never heard of it. Now I'm curious to find out what I could find. Like you said, I'm going to look it up and see what I've come up with. And the fourth,
yes, we have more housing solutions. Another solution is co-housing. We talked before about cooperative housing, and so now we're going to give you an example of a different solution called co-housing. And here in Silver Spring, we have a successful long-term example called Eastern Village Co-housing. And in this housing model, which is also, I would say, in the moderately affordable range, if you come in to buy into it, you have your own private space. In the case of Eastern Village, it's an apartment building. So you and your family have a relatively small apartment, and then you have common areas that you share. So you have both private space that's privately owned, and then you have your common areas that are commonly owned. In a lot of ways, it's the best of both worlds. Mm-hmm. And at Eastern Village, they have a beautiful landscaped courtyard that each apartment looks out, or the kitchen area looks out to the courtyard. They also have a shared dining area and large meeting room for shared meals. And they also have a green roof, so people can go up on the roof and have gatherings up there as well. Yeah, and that's been around since, I want to say, at least 20 years, I believe now. So that has stood the test of time. And all right, maybe go on. Or do you have anything
I believe that the Eastern Village co-housing is pretty nice. I've definitely, when working with my senior residents in the county, it is my second choice to help them prevent them from being displaced. Of course, sometimes they have availabilities and sometimes they don't. But to say that is that co-housing is a great start to helping create a better cohesive living environment for affordable housing. Whereas building up more so is more not a trap house, but I will tell you that when we look at Thrive, we really can't determine if it's going to create affordability or displacement, because I don't know if I only make about $52,000 a year, right? And of course, I'm working free for my organization. But at $52,000 a year, and to pay for my health insurance and food and other living essentials, and then paying $2,200 to $2,400 of rent for a 2-bedroom is not the right investment for developers who are utilizing community block grant funding, Section 3, enterprise zoning funding, the CUFP, and those type of funding opportunities that they're given that is handed to them based on their development and their friends. And so that is not what affordability looks like. Amenities, I don't understand how an investment or a developer is given funding through county, federal, or local municipalities if they're going to create amenities that are unaffordable to an already low-income family or resident. The amenities should be already fixed in to those things, and they are cost burdened. And can you touch a little bit on Mark Elridge's housing reality?
Yes, thank you, Aneshul. Last summer, County Executive Elridge gave a 25-minute video talk that is called Mark Elridge Housing Reality, and I recommend it. You can find it on the web, and he takes us through the numbers of what's going on with our housing reality, and so there are currently 40,000 households that are cost burdened already here in Montgomery County, and of that number, 29,000 households are severely cost burdened. And what that means is cost burdened means that you and your family are paying more than 1/3 of your total income for your rent. And so anybody who's paying more than 1/3 of their total income for rent, you're burdened. That means you have less money that you really need for food and other needs. So we have 29,000 households who are severely cost burdened, and that means that you and your family are paying 50% or more of your income for rent.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that means that food, what else? Food, clothing, transportation, everything else has to be taken from the other 50%. Because I think they said 30% is the maximum that one should have to pay for housing in order to live comfortably on the income that they have.
Yes, and financial advisors recommend the 30% is for your gross income, and it should be limited to 1/4 of your take-home pay. So if you want to get a little more detailed, it's either way, it works out the same.
And as an example of that being a housing solution in relation to, if you look at the Section 8 model, which is in-house, that's the number that they stay in, 30%. So as you see that, if we just look at overall low income or middle income, that we should not be paying more than 30% of our income to live in this county.
Wow.
One of the things that we're going to continue to keep talking on this show is that we love to give that information. And as long as you listen to You Be the Judge, which we are on every Wednesday from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and learning about the things or the economic values or the economic situation you're in, I would suggest you go see some financial advisors. Go see, talk to your wills and probate and see what's going on before you pass away. There are a lot of economical difficulties that people have because they just don't have the information. Well,
I hope this helps. We hope you feel kind, compassionate, and loved. And if you need any help at all, please contact us. Please contact me. I'm Dr. Paul Dyer, and you have been listening to You Be the Judge.